I would like to welcome you to this media briefing on digital trade, digital commerce, all things digital. And we have a fantastic panel today to talk about a fascinating topic. All of you will know how digital technology is changing your lives, and most of you will have experienced how it's changing how you buy things. That buying experience is changing business all over the world. It's changing development opportunities for countries. And it's opening up opportunities, especially for SMEs, women traders, young people. Instead of having to set up an enormous corporation and break into it, people are able to sell goods and services directly online. Now, to discuss this new possibility, actually there's nothing new about it yet, is it? But it's newly interesting because a ton of stuff is going on in trade. And we'll get to one of the things that Biden just announced just a couple of days ago. But to kick us off, I'd like to start with Minister of Cambodia, Pan Surasak. Sorry, I'm terrible about that. And digital is important for your development. Please tell us about that.
Well, thank you, Professor, and I'm really have a great honor to be a panelist in these important sessions. I would like to extend my warmest welcome to our panelists, also from IBM and JETRO. We know each other for a long time, so. And to all the distinguished participants. Trade in digital services has become a rapid growing sector in digital economies, as you mentioned about, and gain more prevalence in daily use. Particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, indeed it has far-rooted in many developed economies. However, its prominence within the more emerging markets, especially in smaller economies like Cambodia, has only just begun to take shapes for the last few years, especially during the COVID-19 closing lockdown, if you will. The rise in internet penetrations and e-commerce in those economies could attribute to large youth populations and improve information, knowledge, and adoptions in communication technology infrastructure. Well, in Cambodia, we have 20.5 million users have mobile phones, and 17.59 of whom have internet connections as of January 2022. Taking into this account pandemic adversities and opportunities, the government of Cambodia has take most advantages of digital sectors as one of the core drivers to accelerate economic growth. With proper strategies and policies introduced in our GDP of Cambodia has rebounded from minus 3.1% in 2020 to 3.0% in 2021, and the projected growth rate over 5% in 2022, following 10 rounds of intervention measure implemented by the royal government of Cambodia. Well, to promote these innovations and openness of trade and digital services, the royal government of Cambodia has undertaken the following. That is, establish the Committee on Digital Government and Committees on Digital Economies and Businesses, implementing the policies on digital government 2022-2035 as the general framework to promote digital transformations, implementing Cambodia Digital Economy and Society Policy Framework 2021-2035 since the last quarter of 2021, implementing the strategic framework and programs for economic recoveries in the context of living with COVID-19 in the new normal 2021-2023 since December 2021, developing the national and ASEAN single windows. Right now we are piloting with Singapore to do the real thing, single windows. developing platforms for data exchange among the government agencies as a private sectors, and private sectors we call CAMDX, which is Cambodia Exchange Data, utilizing the latest technologies to support the financial transactions, intra-cross-border electronic payments, and an online financial transaction which is worth about 113.67 billion US dollars in 2021. There are also 50 companies using fintechs, with 24 companies applying business model with digital payment. We have developed e-market platform for goods and services. Taking full advantage of the fastest fintechs, the committee is developing the policy framework for fintechs in Cambodia. However, despite this growth, the royal government of Cambodia faces the following challenges: legal frameworks, developing and amending some regulation on data governance, Computer Misuse Act, and cyber crimes law, just to name a few. And improving digital payment ecosystems, that's another one. Establishing mechanisms for fintechs implementation and coordinations. Developing roadmaps for fintechs policy. I just want another point here. For Cambodia, the digital transformation is about adopting, capturing, and maximizing the benefits of advances in information and communication technology and digital technology to increase productivity and economic efficiency. That is to boost the national economic growth and build a civilized society where digital citizens can benefit from the use of digital services with high inclusiveness, reliability, and trustworthiness, while at the same time can maintain national identity and culture. I strongly believe Cambodia and the world shall strive to achieve the digital transformation to turn the world economy and society to a higher level of development. I thank you, professors.
Thank you for those comments. Let me just take two things away, which I wish I'd mentioned in my introduction, but you did. COVID.
Yes.
So COVID is in essence been a forced march. I think I've seen estimates that it's 5 or 10 years of advance. But what it really was is it took so many people to the technological frontier. Didn't move the frontier out that much, but everybody learned to use the tools that existed and work together in that space. So that accelerated international trade. The other thing which I liked very much about your approach was that this digital transformation really is a total transformation of the economy. It's not just trade. Trade is actually maybe a side bit on it. All these things you were mentioning to transforming the economy and the society of Cambodia are digital, and digital trade and investment is just part of that. Now, we actually have somebody here on the panel whose company is helping this happen from IBM. Anna Assis, who is a general manager of the EU and MENA area for IBM.
And UK.
And the UK,
Yes.
okay.
You have to remember UK.
All right, yeah, man. Tell you, COVID knocked out a few of my memory things, yes. I think. I'm not sure. But now, one of the things that international companies like yours likes is a clear set of rules. So could you address that angle of this topic, please?
And well, very happy to be here, Minister.
Thank you.
And Sasaki-san. So I think you started saying it perfectly. There is nothing new, right? Trade is as old as the history of humanity. There's a fascinating video that talks about how a pencil is made, right? Yeah. What are the materials that are sourced from many countries around the world. But what technology did was really to accelerate and change completely the pace that all trade is done around the world. So let's just start and do a little bit of a reflection, because you talked about COVID and the last World Economic Forum that I didn't have the opportunity to participate in, but it was done right before the pandemic hit, right? And I wasn't here, but I believe that the word metaverse wasn't discussed in this forum, right? Didn't even exist, this concept. I don't think we saw any advertising on cryptocurrencies and crypto as intensively as we are seeing here. So 2 years, imagine the amount of advance that happened, and we are continuing to discuss, right, how we are going to do and ensure that there is a good governance of data, that you are securing privacy, that you are making sure that there is a free flow in a way that is secure, that is transparent. So the importance of having the frameworks is really to create the standards, because the consequence of not having that is going towards a direction of establishing control points that are just going to be damaging the collaboration that is required for innovation to thrive. So the way to ensure that there is governance, security, and the proper usage of data is not necessarily increasing controls, but is creating frameworks and standards that are the license to operate at the end of the day. It's absolutely impossible. Let's think about a technology, autonomous vehicle, right? If you cannot allow an autonomous vehicle that is completely data-driven to move, let's say, from the frontier of the United States to Canada, because the data that that car is using has to be based in Canada for it to function, you just completely kill the technology, right? And that ability, right, for allowing companies to share that knowledge, to make sure that this data is available in a very global perspective, is really how we are going to enable the possibilities and the opportunities that the digital economy are going to bring. And I think that Sasaki-san is going to comment a little bit more of how this will actually benefit small and medium companies in this process, right? So that aspect of inclusion, not only from a societal standpoint, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on this panel, but how we make sure that the small businesses can also benefit from the opportunities that are being created by the digital economy. And it's not a winner-take-all scenario.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that. Just to share an anecdote, at breakfast I was at yesterday at the Microsoft Cafe, and Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, mentioned that the first cruise missile into Kiev was the government's data center. That's the first thing they attacked.
I see.
And as it turned out, they had their data backed up in the cloud.
Yes.
And apart from that, that would have been disastrous.
Oh,
so
okay.
unlike a lot of things, keeping it all at home might not make it safer. So, I mean, that's quite a kinetic example of diversity and barriers and things. But I think in Japan we say free trade with trust, or free trade in data, free flow of data with trust, or something like that. So that was the other thing I really appreciated about what you said, is the rules aren't necessarily to stop things. It could very well be just to instill trust that somebody's doing proper things with your data, with the control. Somebody's in charge. It's not some sort of Wild West where you, and the other thing to say about it is, one way or another, the companies have to come up with policies to do this.
Absolutely.
But it's internal policies now, and why not just sort of put them into a more common framework where everybody talks about it. Sasaki-san, JETRO is actually one of your, from what I understand, especially since COVID, you're promoting Japanese external trade organization through digital things, in part because it's pretty hard to do anything else.
Yes.
So please tell us about the JETRO efforts.
Okay. Well, the stability of the society needs the balanced development of the economy, and good health of small, medium-sized enterprises can improve the economy of the country and can improve the world economy. So, well, Japanese SMEs are conducting business using digital technology more than ever before the pandemic. And today I would like to introduce what we did for these 2 years. JETRO is an organization to promote trade and investment, not only going out, but also coming in, and big size, small size, everything. We had been supporting small and medium-sized enterprises for a long time, more than 50 years, 60 years. But 2 years ago, all of a sudden, the traditional ways of methods, the exhibition, person-to-person business matching, inviting foreign buyers, all of them could not be used. So we switched business model to digital one. And because of that, the number of contracts through digital technology, which JETRO supports, increased tenfold in these 2 years, 1,500 to 15,000 in 2 years. The cross-border e-commerce has a lot of risks for SMEs, the language barrier, inventory risk, or foreign exchange rate risk, and public relation difficult. But all these trends can be a hurdle for SMEs. So we try to minimize the risks of them. Specifically, we had a contract with a lot of e-commerce platforms of all over the world. Now it's 70, and the platform is called Japan Mall, and under this the platform, the SMEs, Japanese SMEs, can complete their transactions in Japan in Japanese, and that's the platform we have made with a lot of e-commerce sites. And using this scheme had two benefits for SMEs. One is it has greatly improved the geographical restrictions for companies in remote areas of Japan. The opportunities for an easy start to overseas business from local areas have definitely expanded. This means that it has become easier for overseas buyers to reach companies and products for which it was previously difficult to obtain information. And it has, second benefit is it has improved marketing that focuses on the needs of customers and buyers, effect measurement based on data rather than intuition or experience, and matching efficiency using AI. As a result, they have more opportunities to listen to the needs of overseas markets and buyers, and it is easier for each company to understand what products are suitable for the target market. But the situation, however, the situation is the same for all over the world. So the competition is becoming intensifying, and so it's it's a good opportunity, but it's a challenge as well. But at least small and medium-sized enterprises can enter this world and try to reach directly to overseas market. That was what we did, and it's a result of the COVID.
Thank you for that. So let me just push or probe a little bit on that. So these were mostly helping small and medium enterprises, and also, was it for services as well as goods, or was it people getting online to sell services, or were they mostly selling products? How did that engage? And then the last thing is, did you get a feeling for whether there was improving the prospects of women entrepreneurs to export, or maybe you weren't tracking that, but that has been experienced in some cases, and I'm wondering if that was the case with JETRO.
Okay. Well, this Japan Mall is the system, the platform that producers list their products in at JETRO, and this list is open to the e-commerce platformers of all over the world, and they look at this list, and if the products are competitive and they can sell that products to consumers, the platformers themselves come and buy that products, or the trading companies in Japan look at that list, and if they think that it's competitive and can sell to consumers, they take risk, and so there's no risk for the manufacturers, producers, or even farmers to put their products on the list. So that's the system of this Japan Mall. And someone said that the e-commerce is quite good in African countries, but it's not only Africa, but also in Japan, it was very effective for small and medium-sized enterprises to come into this market.
Thank you very much for that. Just to share, there's some fascinating research on the impact of how different e-commerce is than other commerce. So if you look at firms, big real firms, 90% of the export is done by 10% of the firms in a typical country, say the United States. And only 20% of the firms export at all. So 80% non-traded. Where if you go to online e-commerce, it's exactly the opposite. 80% are selling abroad, and it's much, much more diffuse. So if you look at virtual trade and online trade using Alibaba data or eBay data, you see very, very different outcomes. So just to share that with you. Now, one of the very interesting things that's happened is we're starting to sign trade agreements which are digital. I look back in my graduate school notes from 1985, and they did not mention digital trade agreements. I don't know why. But it's a new development. And in fact, we've recently had one really, really new. And so I thought we could just spend a few minutes talking about what was just signed. Was it in Japan where it was actually signed?
Yes.
Okay, with President Biden announcing it. So who wants to start talking about that? Do Anna or Suzaki-san?
I can start. Well, I applaud significantly what has been signed, because one of the first elements that the framework is trying to address is exactly how we're going to ensure that data collaboration and cooperation, data sharing, collaboration, and cooperation exists among all the countries that are part of the framework. And it covers pretty much all the Pacific, right? So it's a fantastic part of the world that has a tremendous group of people, a tremendous population that can benefit significantly from the principles that were created in order to really ensure that there is a fair and equitable opportunity being given as a result of the acceleration of the digital economy. So I think that it's a fantastic step forward. Now it's all about how we can make sure that it's enacted and it's enabled, and all the companies understand how these frameworks are going to be working so that they can adhere to these standards in their implementations. But it's probably one of the most advanced frameworks that we've seen recently, already embedding the aspects of the digital economy that has become really part of everyone's life.
So I understand that it's a particular concern about enforceability.
Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of agreements that are hortatory. They just, you say we're going to do good things, but if you don't, there's no there. So how would you score this on enforceability? Of course, it was just signed.
It's just signed.
So we don't really know. But
Yeah.
But speak a little bit about enforceability in a digital agreement. What would that look like? What would IBM like to see?
I think there is a combination of elements, right? It's, in some way, societies understand that they are the ones that provide license to operate for companies, right? So if companies understand that they have to serve a market, and that market is raising their standards of what they expect responsible companies to do, then companies better shape up their activities. To see what's happening with the ESG. Right? The moment that this becomes, in some way, a requirement that companies report their ESG initiatives in a way that is transparent, that's probably what we'll need to ensure that happens when those frameworks are put in place, is what are the initiatives that your companies are doing to become consistent and compliant with the requirements of the framework. I think that's point number one. And point number two is, what are the facilitations, what are the benefits that are provided to come? I'm not talking about subsidies, nothing like that, but what are the benefits that you can provide by being a company that is compliant with the standards that are proposed by the framework, right? So I think that if we start to have this as part of the commercial arrangements as well, then the adoption is going to happen.
Thank you very much for that. But so it's Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership, right?
Economic framework.
Economic
IPEF,
framework.
yes.
IPEF?
IPEF.
IPEF, we have to say that whole thing? We can't call it EPEF?
IPEF? I don't know, it's so new that we can call it whatever we
can
want.
call it whatever we want. But it's not the only one. and there's Singapore's exploring some, other people are doing them. Sasaki-san, I was wondering if you wanted to comment of how this one is different or how it's different for Japan. And then I'm going to go to the minister who may have some comments about this too. So.
Okay, well, Anna discussed the enforceability of agreement, but in the case of IPF, it was just launched and nothing yet being before us. So, well, they need to start discussion on this each article of digital chapter. But I hope, I have a very strong hope that they will be able to discuss a lot of things which is suitable to this digital age and how to manage the digital field. Thanks to, well, we proposed, well, Japan proposed data free flow with trust in 2019 at G20. And I think it was well accepted by all. But after the COVID and digitalization has expanded, well, beyond our imagination. And the expansion of digitalization, well, because the expansion of the digitalization, the governments try to regulate, and that's quite natural because but the way of regulation is a data localization or a requirement of open source code. Those are quite bad regulation for e-commerce or for digital trade. So there's also a quite natural that well, other forces, the governments try to make some disciplines for each government to obey some disciplines of this data world. And I said that I have a hope for this IPEF is there's a, well, already DPA or CPTPP or those already discussed and agreements are there. And also the WTO is discussing the e-commerce chapter. But I think in this IPEF, well, Asia-Pacific countries are now trying to make some agreements for covering the economy. And it's like a discussion of FTAs. Liberalization should be accompanied by facilitation. All these couples of FTA, liberalization of customs, market access, and liberalization of trade, investment, labor, environment, although all those liberalization had to be balanced by facilitation. And in that sense, I really agree with Anna that the facilitation area or cooperation area is quite important for them to reach an agreement. And some capacity building or create new industries or the data, the cross-border data usage. Those are can be a good facilitation for member countries. Otherwise, they cannot reach agreement.
So I want to come back a little bit to look at this noodle bowl, but I wanted to ask the minister. ASEAN has for quite a while been making quite a big push into digital areas. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what ASEAN's doing, or reflect upon IPEF if you want, or the digital things if you want. But I think the experience of ASEAN is very important for a whole set of countries who are low and middle income countries trying to use digital to advance their development and engagement with the world economy. So could you share with us?
Yeah, I can share with you on all of this stuff. First of all, this year here, Cambodia is the chairman of ASEAN. You know, we rotate every 10 years. We have 10 countries, and Cambodia is the chair right now. And I myself is we have 3 pillars. One is the economic pillars, which I chair as an ASEAN economic ministers, and the culture and the culture pillar is chaired by the Minister of Education, and the diplomatic and politics is chaired by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the three pillars is the backbone, if you will, for the ASEAN countries, and we call ASEAN economic communities. Going back to this for IPEF, it's, this is another one of the trade agreements, if you will. We were talking about TPP in the past, which and you probably forgot about RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which comprise of 10 ASEAN plus 5 ASEAN, 10 ASEAN, which we centralized there, plus 5, which is the Japan, South Korea, China, Australia, and New Zealand. And that comprises about 30% of GDP, world GDP, and about 30% of world populations also that's involved. And it's already entered into force since January 2022. And of course, this includes China, as you see. So I can see IPEF is one of the, it's introduced by USA. Of course, we cannot stop USA of doing anything. So what we would like to see is that all the digital or trade agreements should follow what ASEAN believe, that first, it must provide benefit for peace and development. Second, it's not against any country's initiative. And thirdly, it respects and upholds ASEAN centrality as outlined in the, we have our outlook, which is called ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, AOIP. We have our own Indo-Pacific outlooks. So, you're talking about the IPEF. EU has its own Indo-Pacific strategies as well. So, what can you do as a small economy? So we try to, and ASEAN as a whole, we try to strengthen ourselves and be our own. Take a look at us and see we have, but not necessarily to divide ASEAN, which I believe that it should not, and we hope not. We need to prosper side by side together. We should not take side as a country as a whole. As you see that the war is, you can see the Ukraine and Russians war now, and Cambodia is supporting Ukraine's, the invasions. Although we are friends to Russia also, but we believe in principle that nobody should invade anybody's countries. That's the main thing, and that's why we vote against this kind of invasion. But we believe that the world now is start to polarize themselves, which it's a big concern. My Prime Minister always said that World War III has already begun on economic level, because we already ran out. There's a scarcity of food, scarcities, of fuel. I mean, fuel prices going up, and so on. So, are we going in that direction? So we try to ease the tension a bit. That's why it's a concern. We should use technologies on a peaceful ways, and technologies and the trade agreements, which Cambodia is really for that. We even have a bilateral trade with China. Believe me, LDCs with bilateral trade with the second economies in the world. We've done that, and with South Korea as well. And we're part of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is, unfortunately, we're not part of IPEF. I stop right here. And then
Thank you very much. Well, let me follow up on that a little bit, and thank you for bringing in Ukraine. This is the Ukrainian Davos. There is no topic can be discussed without mentioning it, and who can think about anything else? I actually was at a breakfast this morning that Zelensky dialed into, and Zakhariri was interviewing him. Anyways. So let's come back to this idea that we may be going back to a kind of noodle bowl of trade agreements. If those of you who remember when free trade agreements first started spreading through ASEAN in the 2000s, there were so many of them, and there was a real issue of whether they were getting in each other's way. And part of that was because of tariffs and trade diversion and things. But I wonder, and I'd like to hear what you have to say as to whether digital trade agreements and things like the digital part of CTPP and then IPAF, the digital trade, not everybody signed these digital things. Are they incompatible? If you sign one, does it prevent you from doing something else? Or is it this sort of not although it's kind of messy, it doesn't really get in the way? So let me start with business, who was the greatest people, who hated the noodle bowl when they had 27 different rules of origins and different accesses and that. So let me start. Is it a problem for IBM that there's this proliferation of digital trade agreements?
I think a noodle is better than the bilaterals, quite frankly. So,
so the analogy at the time, it was a lasagna pasta. Yeah. You want to take the noodles and turn it into lasagna pasta.
The noodles is better than spaghetti.
Tastes better. I agree with that. Yeah.
It tastes better. So I think the point is how we create some level of consistency in some key elements. So privacy of data, free flow of data, security, transparency, those are overarching principles, right? And then eventually you need to create aspects that are specific to the requirements of certain economies. We have to understand that there are very different levels of economic advance in each one of those countries. And we need to take that into consideration. And I think we haven't brought that yet on the panel, but to me it's probably the most critical element, which is ensuring that you have a consistent base of skills across the multiple countries and economies that we are operating in. Because digital is only beneficial when the majority can gain and have opportunities out of that, and not the other way around, right? When it's benefit just for a little and everyone else is left behind. So I think that one of the key elements when we look at all this soup of frameworks is how much focus is being given on reskilling, upskilling, creating the capabilities, so that if we have different aspects or certain specificities that are required to be implemented on some of the regional agreements, that we have at least the same level of capability, right, to ensure that when all this noodle gets combined, we are playing on the same level field. So to me, that's the element that now we got to ensure that in each one of those frameworks, that the aspect of creating the capacity around skills is part of it.
Right. So Saki-san, you were mentioning that, and I'm going to come to you in a second. And Minister Pan, you were talking about the program, which was very much in that line of creating skills among the people to take advantage of the digital. But let me push you, Anna, just a little bit on this incompatibility of certain provisions. So let's suppose one says you cannot do data localization, and then other countries have national laws that insist on data localization. Is that creating two completely incompatible systems?
I don't think it's truly incompatible. It's going to be more difficult to foster collaboration. It's going to be certainly more costly to foster collaboration. So it's not a matter that it can't or cannot be done. It's just, is this effective? Is this accelerating innovation? Is this making it more democratic? Or you are creating a cluster of those that have a lot of data, right? And all the intelligence are going to benefit more because I'm not allowing that free flow of knowledge to happen. Minister Pan addressed China, right? I mean, how much of the knowledge that is being created in China is being leveraged to other parts because we're not being able to have all that sharing of knowledge happening. So I think it's not incompatible but certainly constraints.
Create speed bumps.
Create speed bumps,
Yes,
exactly.
yes. Thank you very much. So, Sasaki-san, JETRO is, I think, this point that it's no use signing digital trade agreements if you have nobody who can do it. Is that kind of, and you talked about capacity building. Mention like how important that is, what JETRO's doing, and you just said it in the meantime. But what I worry a little bit about is if there's a bit of capacity building or trade facilitation aid in each of these, that there's some sort of everybody falling over each other or counting maybe the same aid for 5 different agreements. How do you see the capacity building elements, trade facilitation ability, in these agreements?
Well, in case of trading goods, there was a GATT, which is a principal constitution, which controls all the FTAs. But in case of data, it's a quite new area which we are now should face. And now is the time that the trial and error, well, if I may say so, we try one agreement and another agreement, which is a different members and different content. But we should consolidate these different experiences to something. And as I said before, the WTO should be the place to discuss by more members. But it takes some time to reach to that place. Because FTA is quite easier than agreeing to the multilateral rules. So FTA, particularly this digital-only FTA, will take place a lot of different way, and that will be a trial and error process to reach to the WTO.
So, Minister Pan, I'm going to come to you in a second on following up with the human building, but I want to push Sasaki-san on the WTO. So we have, hopefully, MC12, the Ministerial Conference 12 coming up, and many people are optimistic that the e-commerce deal will somehow get announced or done. And then I understand there's 86 countries who are on board for it. So do you have a sort of update or what's your view of the likelihood of this thing working? And do you have some insights from what's going to happen at MC12?
Sorry, I'm not joining to the WTO process.
Right.
Probably Minister Pan should be the right person.
Well, I think I just came out from the WTO's ministerials, if you will, with Dr. Ngosi's preparations on a WTO 12, MC12 on the 12th of June, I think. There's a light, there's a light in tunnel that we can. It seems to me that I'm really I'm on the optimistic side. Dr. Ngozi always begged that everybody need to negotiate, and we have to think about small economies first. Small economies, which is the most vulnerable, countries that would be affected, because we need WTOs more than, I don't know, more than bigger economies, because you can be on your own. So there's a lot of light, optimisms on this, and talking about e-commerce. I think it's going to go, it's going to fly.
That's very optimistic.
So yeah, let me continue a little bit, if you don't mind.
We have 2 minutes, but please. Okay. The only thing I get paid for is ending on time.
I've been talking.
I don't get paid.
A couple of days ago, I was at the panel talking trade barriers for recoveries, which the private sectors talk about blockchain because of the you transferring data and things like that. You need to use these kind of technologies. Of course, you can do blockchain exchanging data, because there's some proprietary data that you need to control. Can be done, I know, but technology-wise, but think about human development. In small economies, poorer countries, they don't have that infrastructure. So you need to have a sort of, you have to bring up, it's really a sharp curve to go through blockchain. We don't have infrastructure whatsoever in our country, not to talk about people, what is blockchain? I don't know what is this. So that's one thing you need to do is capacity buildings and doing data exchange. I have, you mentioned about some data is proprietary, some data you cannot move. Yes, like Japan during the RCEP negotiation, you said that data has to be proprietary because by the constitutions, you cannot move data or put in a neutral place or cloud or whatever. But this is something that you need to do. But I truly believe that technology can do it. But with blockchain or whatever to move things around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any last burning comments in the 30 seconds we have, or else we'll close on time? I think it was a fascinating discussion. Wish we had another hour to go on about it, but I do think we touched on lots of things. It's a new opportunity. There's a new governance coming along. It requires the cooperation of businesses, governments, and international organizations. And we're kind of going into a new noodle bowl. So we keep tuned to this channel. We'll have to talk about this next year as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for having participated and bring this session to a close.
Thank you.